Some of the strongest materials ever made are thousands of years old, yet the methods to create them have vanished from history. This is the central mystery of ancient metallurgy. We are left with objects of astonishing durability, alloys that modern science can barely explain, let alone perfectly recreate. This video is an investigation into that gap between ancient achievement and lost knowledge. By the end, you will understand not just what was lost, but why some secrets of the material world may be forever beyond our reach. How did a Roman harbor survive two of pounding waves, while our modern concrete crumbles in decades? What allowed a medieval sword to bend without breaking, possessing a sharpness that became legend? The answers lie in forgotten workshops where fire, earth, and human intuition combined in ways we are still struggling to decode. What does it say about our own technology when the past can still hold secrets we cannot crack? Durability is a story told over centuries. For an ancient alloy, it is not merely about being hard or strong in a single moment. It is a promise of defiance against time itself. This long-term performance rests on three pillars, concepts any engineer today would recognize, but which ancient smiths had to discover through trial and fire. The first is corrosion resistance, the ability to stand unyielding against air, water, and salt. Consider the iron pillar in Delhi, a 7-ton monster 100 years ago. In a climate of monsoon rains and humidity, it should be a crumbling relic of rust. Yet its surface bears only a thin, protective patina, a self-healing layer that has resisted total decay for more than 16 centuries. The second pillar is fatigue strength, a material's inner resilience against the slow, grinding wear of repeated stress. A sword that shatters on the 10th blow is useless, no matter how sharp its first strike. True durability lies in flexibility, in a hidden structure that absorbs shock without failing. The third is environmental stability, the capacity to remain unchanged whether buried in acidic soil, submerged in seawater, or exposed to desert winds. Look at the gold of funerary mask, resting undisturbed for over 3,000 years. Its luminous surface, untarnished and precise, speaks of a metal so pure and stable that the very air could not claim it. These are the benchmarks of our investigation, not mere artifacts but time capsules of performance. When we say an ancient alloy was durable, we mean it passed the ultimate test, a test administered not in a laboratory but by the relentless patience of history. That very promise of defiance creates a profound and unsettling contradiction. The tools available to an ancient smith were, by our modern standards, almost laughably simple. A clay-lined pit for a furnace, animal skin bellows for air, charcoal for fuel, and raw ore dug from the earth. There were no digital pyrometers to measure temperature with laser precision, no electron microscopes to peer into the atomic heart of the metal, no textbooks on crystalline phase diagrams. This was a world of sensory intuition, of judging a forge's heat by the color of its glow and the taste of the air, of learning a recipe not from a formula, but from a master who learned from his master before him. The process was empirical, built on generations of observed cause and effect, but not on what we would call scientific theory. And yet, from these elemental conditions emerged alloys with microstructures so refined, so optimally arranged, that they rival and sometimes surpass what our advanced laboratories can produce today. This is the metallurgical paradox, the gap that sits at the heart of our mystery. How could limited tools yield unlimited results? It suggests that their knowledge, though not expressed in our language of atoms and grains, was profound in a different way. It was a deep, ingrained wisdom of material behavior, a harmony achieved between the craftsman, the fire, and the metal itself. The true sophistication was not in the complexity of their equipment, but in the subtlety of their control over a fundamentally chaotic process. They were not just making metal, they were conducting it, guiding its formation through stages we might now call annealing, quenching, and tempering, but which they knew as the rhythm of the work. This gap between their assumed primitive capability and their stunning material achievement is what makes every surviving artifact a question, and every failed modern reproduction a clue. The legend of Damascus steel begins not in a forge, but on a battlefield under a desert sun. European knights during the Crusades encountered blades of a quality that their understanding. These swords, carried by Muslim warriors, possessed a mesmerizing, watery surface pattern, like the ripples on a pond frozen in metal. But their beauty was a warning. They were said to be so sharp and resilient they could slice a silk scarf floating on the air, and then, in the next moment, cleave through the iron links of a knight's. To a soldier whose own weapon might shatter or bend against armor, this was not just superior craftsmanship, it was sorcery made solid. The metal seemed alive, its flowing pattern hinting at a hidden, liquid strength. The name Damascus stuck, though the steel's true origin lay further east. It was forged from a unique type of high-carbon steel ingot known as Wootz, produced primarily in ancient India. These ingots were a prized trade commodity, transported to centers like Damascus in Syria, where master smiths would work the material through a secret and meticulous process. The result was a blade that combined seemingly impossible properties, a flexibility that prevented brittleness with an edge that could be honed to a frightening degree of sharpness. This was not a blunt instrument, it was a precision tool of war, and its reputation grew from witnessed performance into the realm of myth. The pattern itself, that iconic rippling surface, was not merely etched or decorated. It was the visual fingerprint of the steel's extraordinary internal microstructure, a complex matrix of ultra-hard cementite carbides within a softer, tougher ferrite base. This natural lamination, created through specific cycles of heating, forging, and cooling, gave the blade its legendary combination of hardness and toughness. The pattern was proof of the alloy's quality, a map of its resilience written in light and shadow on the metal itself. For centuries, the method of its creation was guarded knowledge, passed from master to apprentice in the heat and smoke of the workshop. Then, silence. By the early 19th century, the production of true pattern welded Damascus steel ceased. The supply of the original Wootz ingots dwindled, and the precise, artisanal techniques faded from memory, leaving behind only the legendary blades and a mystery that would taunt metallurgists for generations. The silence that followed the last Damascus forge left a riddle in 3 parts, a recipe where every ingredient and every step held a secret. It began with the earth itself, with a specific type of iron ore mined in the southern regions of ancient India. This was not ordinary iron. It contained trace amounts of vanadium and other rare elements, impurities that modern science now knows were crucial. These elements acted as natural catalysts, subtly guiding the formation of the steel's internal structure during the long, slow process to come. This raw material was transformed through a method known as crucible steel. The ore was placed in a small, sealed clay crucible along with pieces of wood and green leaves, often from specific local plants. The crucible was then heated in a charcoal furnace for up to 24 hours. This was not a simple melt, it was a carefully controlled chemical reaction in isolation. The organic material inside did not just burn, it carbonized, releasing carbon that slowly, uniformly infused the molten iron, turning it into a high-carbon steel ingot, the prized Wootz. But the true magic, the step that has proven most elusive to recreate, came next. The Wootz ingot was not forged like common steel. It underwent a meticulous stage thermal cycling process. The smith would repeatedly heat the steel to a precise, sub-melting temperature, often described as a bright yellow heat, then forge it lightly, then allow it to cool slowly, sometimes buried in insulating ashes. This cycle was repeated dozens, perhaps hundreds of times. Each cycle gently encouraged the carbon in the steel to migrate and arrange itself into those microscopic plates of ultra-hard cementite carbide. It was a patient, rhythmic dance of heat and pressure, coaxing the metal to organize its own internal architecture into the legendary banded pattern. The final shape of the blade was forged at a lower temperature to preserve this delicate microstructure, followed by a precise quench and a painstaking polish with mild acidic agents that would etch the surface, revealing the hidden, watery pattern within. The loss was not of one technique, but of an entire symphony of control. From the unique ore to the secret recipe in the crucible, to the master smith's intuitive reading of the fire's color, and the metal's song under the hammer. Modern attempts using pure materials and digital controls often produce a pattern, but the resulting steel lacks the legendary combination of flexibility and extreme sharpness. We can mimic the appearance, but we have not yet recaptured the performance, suggesting a harmony of variables we still do not fully understand. The quest to resurrect Damascus steel became a scientific obsession. For over 200 years, from the early 19th century onward, blacksmiths and metallurgists have tried to reverse engineer the legendary blades, each attempt a lesson in what was missing. The first major effort came from Russia, where a prominent scientist dedicated years to experimentation. He managed to produce a patterned steel, but it was a decorative imitation, lacking the legendary toughness and keen edge. He had captured the ghost, but not the spirit of the metal. The problem was fundamental. They were working backward from a finished product without the original recipe. It was like trying to bake a perfect, complex cake by only tasting a single slice from one made centuries ago. You know the final flavor, but not the ingredients, the oven temperature, or the precise order of mixing. The breakthrough in understanding, though not in replication, came with the advent of modern microscopy. When researchers finally placed a sliver of an authentic Damascus blade under a scanning electron microscope, they saw something astonishing. Within the intricate matrix of the steel, they found not just the expected carbide bands, but evidence of carbon nanotubes, structures so advanced we associate them with 21st century nanotechnology. These tiny, cylindrical arrangements of carbon atoms, formed over a millennium ago, would have acted as microscopic reinforcement, giving the steel exceptional strength and resilience. This discovery was both a revelation and a deeper mystery. It proved the ancient process achieved a level of material engineering we thought impossible for its time. Yet, knowing the end result did not reveal the path to get there. Modern smiths can now create steel with a similar pattern, often by mechanically folding different alloys together, a technique called pattern welding. But this is a different material, a visual tribute rather than a true rebirth. The original method relied on that specific, trace element-rich Wootz ingot, and the patient, cyclical thermal treatment that coaxed the nanotubes and carbide bands to form from within. We have the map of the destination, revealed by our most powerful instruments, but the journey, the specific sequence of fires and the intuition that guided them, remains locked in the past. Each failed modern replica whispers the same truth, that some forms of knowledge are not just information, but a lived harmony between material, environment, and artisan, a harmony that silence has broken. The sea is the ultimate test of any material meant to defy time. While Damascus steel conquered the battlefield, another ancient innovation was engineered to withstand a slower, more relentless enemy, the ceaseless corrosion of. This brings us to our second great mystery, not of a blade, but of a breakwater, and to a material so commonplace today we rarely consider its ancestry, concrete. Modern concrete, for all its strength, has a critical weakness in marine environments. Into its pores, reacts with its components, and slowly expands, creating internal cracks that spell its doom within mere decades. Now, look at the harbors of the ancient Roman world. At countless other sites across the Mediterranean, massive underwater structures still stand after 2,000 years of wave action and chemical assault. They are not merely surviving, they are thriving, having grown stronger where modern equivalents would have long since turned to rubble. This is not the concrete we know. Roman marine concrete was a formulated masterpiece, a composite material whose recipe presents a metallurgical puzzle every bit as complex as the forging of a legendary sword. Its durability was not an accident, it was baked into its very formulation, a secret that was lost with the empire itself, and only now are we beginning to decipher. The Romans called this material opus. Its key ingredient was a volcanic ash found near the city of, known as pozzolana. This ash, when mixed with lime and seawater, triggered a chemical reaction that modern chemists call a reaction. But the Roman process went far beyond simple mixing. They combined this ash with lumps of lime and chunks of volcanic rock aggregate, then used seawater directly as the mixing agent, not fresh water. To an engineer today, this sounds like a recipe for instant failure, introducing the corrosive agent at the very moment of creation. Yet, for the Romans, it was the catalyst for longevity. The magic happened as it cured. While modern Portland cement concrete sets in a relatively simple reaction, Roman concrete underwent a slow, hot, and complex process. The seawater mixture facilitated the growth of rare minerals within the matrix, most notably a crystalline structure known as aluminous. This mineral is notoriously difficult to produce in a lab, requiring high temperatures and precise conditions. Yet, in the Roman, it formed naturally over decades as seawater filtered through the material. These interlocking crystals act like a permanent, self-reinforcing repair system. When tiny cracks do begin to form from the stress of the waves, seawater seeps in and reacts with the remaining volcanic material, depositing new crystals that literally heal the fissure. The concrete is not a static, decaying block. It is a dynamic, living rock that grows more resilient with age. This stands in stark contrast to our modern material, which is designed to be inert and unchanging, a philosophy that ultimately makes it more vulnerable. The Roman engineers, without a single understanding of crystalline chemistry, had empirically discovered a formula for creating a material that could maintain a conversation with the very element it was meant to resist. They built structures with an embedded sense of time, designed not just for their generation, but for centuries they would never see. The loss of this recipe was a monumental step backward, consigning us to a cycle of constant repair and replacement. Our harbors crumble while theirs endure, a silent and profound testament to a knowledge that was, in its own way, as sophisticated and as lost as the secret of the smith's fire. The Romans built their marine concrete from a deceptively simple list of ingredients. They began with quicklime, a caustic powder made by roasting limestone in a kiln. To this, they added the crucial component pozzolana, the fine volcanic ash from the region around Mount Vesuvius. This ash, rich in silica and alumina, was not just a filler, it was the reactive heart of the mixture. Finally, they gathered chunks of volcanic rock as aggregate, and then they did something that still baffles modern engineers. they mixed it all not with fresh water, but directly with seawater from the very harbor they were building. This final choice is the pivot point of the entire mystery. Modern Portland cement, invented in the 19th century, is a different creature entirely. It relies on a controlled, high-temperature process to create calcium silicates, and it is meticulously designed to be mixed with pure, salt-free water. Introducing chlorides from seawater is considered catastrophic, a sure path to internal corrosion and structural failure. The Roman formula, therefore, seems to break every rule we have established. So how could they have known that this seemingly corrosive brew would yield a material of immortal strength? The answer lies in a chemical conversation that unfolds over centuries. When seawater mingles with the lime and pozzolana, it initiates a slow, hot, and profoundly complex reaction. Over decades, as seawater percolates through the concrete's pores, it reacts with the volcanic ash to form incredibly rare crystalline structures, particularly a mineral called aluminous. This mineral is so difficult to synthesize that scientists struggle to produce it consistently, even with precise laboratory equipment. Yet within the Roman breakwaters, it grows naturally, forming interlocking plates that reinforce the concrete from the inside out. This is the true secret. The concrete was never meant to be a static, finished product. It was designed as a dynamic system, a kind of artificial rock that uses the environmental challenge of seawater as the catalyst for its own long-term repair and strengthening. The mystery deepens when we ask how this knowledge was acquired. The Romans possessed no electron microscopes, no understanding of crystalline chemistry. Their discovery was almost certainly empirical, born from observation and generations of iterative trial. Perhaps an early builder lacking fresh water, used seawater in desperation and noticed, years later, that the resulting wall grew harder, not weaker. This observation, passed down and refined, became practice. They knew the what with absolute certainty. The formula is recorded in the writings of Vitruvius. But the why, the intricate dance of ions and long-term mineral growth, remained a hidden truth within the material itself. Their knowledge was not a set of chemical equations, but a deep, practical wisdom of cause and effect written in stone and seawater. A wisdom that vanished when the societal structures supporting such long-term building traditions collapsed. We are left with the enduring structures as both proof of their genius and a silent question. How many other such harmonies between material and environment have we forgotten? Simply because we stopped listening to the slow teachings of time, this gap between a list of ingredients and a living, breathing craft is where the deepest secrets of Roman concrete lie. We know they used lime, pozzolana, volcanic rock, and seawater. But knowing a chef uses flour, water, and yeast does not mean you can bake the perfect loaf of bread. The mastery was in the protocol, the precise and now vanished sequence of actions that transformed those raw materials into a stone that could heal itself. First was the mixing, and evidence suggests the Romans may have used a method called hot mixing. Instead of using slaked lime, a more stable and less reactive paste, they likely added the quicklime directly to the moist volcanic ash and aggregate. Quicklime is highly caustic, and when it contacts water, it undergoes a violent exothermic reaction, releasing intense heat. This was not a mistake, it was a calculated step. The hot mix would have created a more porous, less uniform initial structure, filled with tiny voids and channels. To a modern engineer, this looks like a flaw, a weakness. But to the Roman process, these pores were essential. They were the future highways for seawater, the delivery system that would allow the long-term chemical conversation to penetrate deep into the heart of the material. The placement was another act of subtle wisdom. They poured this steaming, reactive slurry into wooden forms, often directly into the tidal zone. The wood itself played a role, likely helping to regulate moisture and temperature during the initial set. But the true magic began with the cure, a word that feels entirely inadequate for what happened next. This was not a matter of keeping the concrete damp for a few weeks. The curing agent was the Mediterranean Sea itself. From the moment the forms were removed, the concrete was baptized in, subjected to the gentle lapping of waves at low tide and the full submersion of high tide. This cyclic, decades-long bathing was not an attack on the material. It was the final, indispensable step in its creation. The seawater slowly infiltrated those purpose-built pores, reacting with the leftover chunks of lime and the reactive volcanic glass in the ash. Over years, this process precipitated those rare, interlocking crystals of aluminous, effectively growing a second, stronger skeleton within the initial porous one. The concrete did not just dry, it metamorphosed. It became something entirely new, a synthetic rock whose strength was a product of patient, environmental collaboration. This is the profound distinction the Romans understood instinctively, a distinction we have largely lost. We build for immediate, maximum strength, creating dense, sealed materials meant to resist the environment as a static enemy. The Romans built for longevity, creating a porous, receptive material designed to engage with the environment as a dynamic partner. They engineered not just a substance, but a process embedded in time. The loss, then, was not merely of a formula scribbled on a scroll. It was the loss of a philosophy, a craft tradition that understood building as a conversation with nature, not a declaration of war against it. The wooden forms are gone, the specific rhythm of the mixing is forgotten, and the master builders who could read the setting material like a physician reads a pulse are silent. We are left with the magnificent, enduring results, a testament to a way of knowing that saw material not as a dead thing to be dominated, but as a living system to be guided. The harbor walls of Rome speak of a dialogue with the sea, but in the tombs of ancient China, a different conversation was taking place, one between metal and the spirit world. Here, bronze was not merely a material for tools or weapons. It was the sacred medium of state power and ancestral reverence, shaped into objects of breathtaking complexity and near impossible perfection. The ritual vessels of the Shang and Zhou dynasties stand as the undisputed pinnacle of this art. These were not simple pots, they were cosmic diagrams cast in metal, adorned with intricate masks and swirling thunder patterns, each line and curve holding symbolic meaning. To hold one was to commune with heaven itself. The technical mastery required to create them is staggering, even by today's standards. The most astonishing examples are not small trinkets, but monumental pieces like the ding, a rectangular cauldron weighing over 1,700 pounds. Its walls are cast thin and perfectly even, a feat of foundry engineering that defies the era's assumed limitations. This was precision on a colossal scale, achieved over 3,000 years ago. But the mystery deepens with an even more spectacular discovery: the bronze chariots and horses unearthed near the resting place of the first emperor, Qin. These are not solid statues. They are fully functional, half-life-size replicas with working parts, from flexible harnesses made of intricate bronze links to windows with grills so fine they resemble woven metal cloth. Each chariot was cast in thousands of separate sections and then joined with flawless craftsmanship. The corrosion resistance is another marvel. Buried for over 2 in damp earth, these bronzes emerged not as crumbling, oxidized lumps, but with vast areas of their surface retaining a smooth, stable patina, their exquisite details still sharply defined. This resilience points to a sophisticated, controlled alloy, but the greater puzzle lies in how they were made at all. How did ancient founders cast such enormous, intricate shapes with walls of consistent thinness, without the metal cooling too quickly and freezing in the mold, or creating weak spots and fatal flaws? The answer lies in a lost system of piece mold casting, so advanced it feels like a technology out of time. The Chinese method was a masterpiece of reverse engineering in clay. Unlike the lost wax process used elsewhere, where a single wax model is melted away, Chinese artisans pioneered an astoundingly complex system called piece mold casting. They began not by sculpting the final object in wax, but by creating a precise, fired clay model of the vessel itself. This model was then carefully covered in layers of a special clay mixture to form a sectional mold. Once this outer mold was hardened, it was painstakingly cut away in interlocking pieces, like dismantling a three-dimensional puzzle. These pieces were then fired into durable ceramic sections. Next, the original clay model was shaved down uniformly, its surface scraped away to become the core. The reassembled ceramic mold pieces would fit around this smaller core, leaving a perfect, thin gap between them, the exact shape and thickness of the final bronze wall. Molten metal was then poured into this gap. This technique allowed for breathtaking control, enabling the casting of those massive, thin-walled vessels with intricate surface designs, actually carved into the inner faces of the ceramic mold pieces themselves. The basics of this method are understood. The profound mystery, the lost knowledge, lies in the ancillary techniques that made it possible. First was the secret recipe of the mold clay itself. It wasn't ordinary earth. It was an engineered blend likely containing rice husk ash, fine sand, and specific clays that gave it just the right balance of strength, permeability, and smoothness to capture microscopic detail while surviving the thermal shock of molten bronze. Second was the burnout process. Even though they used clay models, organic materials like binders were still present. Heating the massive, reassembled mold to drive out any moisture or gases without causing it to crack or warp required a precisely controlled kiln atmosphere and heating cycle. A ritual of fire management known only to the master founders, but the greatest puzzle of all was the pour. Imagine controlling a river of molten bronze, heated over 1,000 degrees Celsius, as it flows into that narrow, complex gap around a large core. The metal had to fill every crevice of the intricate design before it began to cool. This demanded a perfectly tuned alloy, one that remained fluid longer than usual, and a pouring system of multiple gates and vents engineered to eliminate trapped air. The temperature of the metal, the temperature of the mold, the speed of the pour, all had to be in a perfect, unrecorded harmony. A single misstep meant a catastrophic flaw, a ruined vessel, and a waste of unimaginable resources. This was knowledge that resided not in a manual, but in the embodied experience of the crafting collective, in the shared intuition of generations who could read the color of the metal and the sound of the pour. When that unbroken chain of transmission was severed, whether through social upheaval or the shift to simpler iron technologies, the full symphony of techniques vanished. We can admire the result, we can even attempt clumsy reproductions, but the effortless grace that produced a perfect cast weighing over a ton, with walls as thin as a book, remains a silent testament to a craftsmanship so refined it borders on alchemy. But the artistry of ancient Chinese metalwork extended far beyond the shape of the vessel or the precision of the cast. On the surface of many of these bronzes, particularly on the enigmatic mirrors of the Han Dynasty, lies another layer of lost genius. These objects are often covered in a smooth, lustrous patina so deep and dark, It resembles polished obsidian or a still, midnight pond. This is not the random, crusty green of accidental decay we see on old pennies. This mirror black finish was an intentional, engineered skin, a final transformative treatment applied by the artisan to protect the metal and to fulfill a purpose that was both practical and profoundly spiritual. The creation of this perfect, stable black patina is a sub-mystery within the larger puzzle, a secret chemical recipe that has evaporated from history. To understand why this surface was so important, we must step into the world of the Han Dynasty mirror. These were not simple grooming tools, they were cosmic maps and protective talismans. The back was often elaborately decorated with symbols of the heavens, the four cardinal directions, and mythological beasts. The front, the reflective side, was polished to a brilliant, silvery shine. But many of these mirrors were then subjected to a final process that turned that shining surface into a featureless, dark pool. Why would anyone blacken a mirror? The answer lies in its dual nature. When polished, it reflected the visible world, the face of the user. But when treated to create this special black patina, the mirror was believed to reveal the invisible world. It became a tool for divination, a surface for scrying, a gateway to communicate with ancestors and spirits. The blackness was not an absence of light, but an absorption of it, creating a void into which the unseen could manifest. This required a patina that was perfectly even, perfectly stable, and perfectly black, a technical challenge of the highest order. Modern analysis of these mirror black surfaces reveals a stunning sophistication. The patina is not a simple layer of dirt or corrosion. It is a thin, coherent film of crystalline corrosion products, primarily stable copper sulfides or complex oxides. This film is chemically bonded to the bronze beneath, creating a barrier that actually prevents further destructive corrosion. It is a shield grown from the metal itself. The recipes for creating such a surface are hinted at in fragmentary ancient texts, mentioning processes involving mercury and 5 minerals or treatments with sulfurous compounds. The likely method was a form of intentional, controlled corrosion. The mirror may have been exposed to vapors from heating sulfur or certain sulfides, or it might have been treated with a paste containing mercury salts and then carefully heated in a controlled atmosphere. The artisan was walking a razor's edge, using chemistry to coax the metal's surface to transform into a specific, protective compound without damaging the precise cast shape or decorative detail underneath. It was alchemy in the truest sense, a transmutation of surface properties. The knowledge was a fragile synergy of material science and ritual practice. The master needed to know the exact proportions of the chemical agents, the correct temperature for the reaction, the optimal duration of exposure, and even the right atmospheric conditions in the workshop. This was knowledge gained through generations of experimentation, passed down as a guarded craft secret. When the social and cultural context that supported this specific ritual art faded, the precise protocols faded with it. Today, conservators and chemists can analyze the black patina and identify its components, but knowing what it is made of is not the same as knowing how to make it. Modern attempts to recreate it often result in patches of dull gray or uneven green, a far cry from the profound, uniform black of the original mirrors. The finish is a testament to a holistic understanding where the chemical process was inseparable from the cultural purpose, where making the metal beautiful and stable was the same act as making it sacred. The mirror black patina is more than a finish. It is the final, silent word of the ancient artisan, a perfect and durable mystery staring back at us from the depths of time. Platinum is a metal of the modern age. the stuff of high-end laboratory equipment and catalytic converters. Its melting point, over 3,200 degrees Fahrenheit, is a realm of heat only achievable with advanced electric furnaces or oxygen-fueled torches. This fact makes the discovery in the coastal jungles of Ecuador not just surprising, but seemingly impossible. Here, the La culture, flourishing over 2,000 years ago, left behind a legacy of tiny, exquisite artifacts, nose rings, ear ornaments, and miniature masks, crafted not from gold or silver, but from platinum. To the modern eye, this is an anachronism that defies the timeline of technology. How could a people working with simple clay furnaces and blowpipes, technologies incapable of melting iron, possibly work a metal with a melting point hundreds of degrees higher? The answer is that they didn't melt it at all. They mastered it through a different path entirely, one that reveals a profound and intuitive understanding of material behavior. Confronted with a metal that refused to become liquid, the La invented a workaround of stunning ingenuity. They gathered native platinum, which occurs in the region as tiny, dense grains in river sands, like metallic seeds. These grains were then meticulously mixed with a small amount of gold dust. Gold, with its much lower melting point, was the key. The mixture was likely placed in a clay crucible and heated in a charcoal furnace. The temperature was carefully controlled, not to melt the platinum, but to reach the point where the gold would soften and begin to flow. This process, known as sintering, is a form of powder metallurgy. The molten gold wetted the surfaces of the platinum grains, acting as a liquid binder that glued the solid particles together into a cohesive, porous mass. This spongy metallic lump could then be worked, hammered, and shaped while hot, the gold serving as a kind of metallic glue that allowed the platinum grains to be forged into a solid object. The result was not a pure platinum artifact, but a sophisticated composite material, a natural alloy of platinum and gold. The craftsmanship involved is breathtaking in its precision. These artisans had to control the furnace atmosphere to prevent oxidation, know the exact ratio of gold to platinum needed for sufficient binding, and master the hammering technique to consolidate the material without it crumbling apart. They were, in effect, performing nanoscale engineering before the concept existed, building objects particle by particle. This was not a failed attempt to reach an unattainable temperature. It was a brilliant lateral solution, a complete reimagining of what metalworking could be. The loss of this technique is particularly poignant because it represents a branch of technological thinking that was entirely unique. While the old world was focused on melting and casting, the artisans of La pioneered a path of consolidation and composite building. Their silent, glittering artifacts are more than jewelry. They are proof that human innovation can follow many different roads to the same destination, and that some of the most elegant solutions come not from overcoming a barrier with brute force, but from learning to walk through it in an entirely new way. The La artisans faced a material that their fire. Native platinum, gathered as dense, silvery grains from river sands, simply would not melt in their clay furnaces. So they listened to the metal, and it told them a different story. Instead of trying to conquer its impossible melting point, they learned to collaborate with its natural state. This is the heart of the lost sintering art, a process of building rather than melting. It began with an act of profound selection. Not every grain of platinum was suitable. The artisans sought out specific nuggets that were not pure platinum, but a natural alloy already fused with gold within the earth itself. These composite grains, sometimes called platinum gold, were the perfect raw material. They possessed a lower melting point for the gold content and a natural affinity for bonding. The chosen grains were then mixed with additional fine gold dust, the precious glue that would make everything possible. The mixture was placed in a simple clay crucible and heated in a charcoal furnace. The master smith did not need a thermometer. He read the fire's color and intensity. The goal was not a roaring inferno, but a precise, sustained heat just hot enough to soften the gold. At this critical temperature, the gold would begin to flow like a thick liquid, coating each individual platinum grain in a shimmering film. This was the moment of transformation, where separate particles began to commune. What emerged from the crucible was not a molten pool, but a glowing, spongy mass, a metallic dough held together by golden bonds. Now came the rhythmic, physical dialogue between craftsman and material. Using stone or copper hammers, the smith would carefully work this hot, porous lump. He would hammer it, then return it to the furnace to reheat, then hammer it again. Each heating cycle allowed the gold binder to flow a little more, migrating into the voids between platinum grains. Each hammering cycle compressed those grains closer together, squeezing out pockets of air and mechanically forging new bonds between them. This was a patient, cyclical dance of heat and pressure, repeated dozens of times, slowly persuading a pile of loose grains to forget their individuality and become a single, coherent whole. The final object, a nose ring or a tiny mask, was therefore a microcosm of the process itself, a solid piece of metal that was, under incredible magnification, a mosaic of fused particles. Its strength and luster were a direct result of this intimate, hands-on consolidation. The finishing touches involved meticulous polishing with fine abrasives, perhaps sand or plant fibers, to bring up a smooth, unified surface that hid its granular origins beneath a continuous, lustrous sheen. The loss here is not of a grand formula, but of a deep, tactile wisdom. It is the loss of knowing exactly how hot the fire must feel on the face, the exact sound the semi-solid mass makes under a precise hammer blow, the intuitive sense for when the material has been worked enough. But not too much. This knowledge resided in the hands and the senses of the artisan, a language of heat and pressure that was never written down, only performed. When the cultural context that valued these objects faded, the delicate chain of apprenticeship broke, and this quiet, brilliant conversation between human ingenuity and stubborn metal fell silent, leaving behind only the exquisite, enduring proof that it once occurred. That granular wisdom of La points to a deeper truth linking all our mysteries. From the rhythmic heating of a Damascus ingot to the precise pour of a bronze cauldron, these were not sciences as we define them today. They were arts of deep observation, refined over lifetimes and passed down as sacred, unspoken knowledge. This was the world of empirical alchemy, where mastery came not from understanding atomic structures, but from a profound, accumulated feel for cause and effect. The smith knew that if the Wootz steel glowed a particular shade of cherry red before being quenched, the blade would sing a certain way under the hammer. The Roman concrete mixer knew that the volcanic ash from, and no other, made a mortar that set harder in seawater. These were not hypotheses to be tested, they were truths written in the material itself, learned through 10,000 repetitions and countless silent failures. The knowledge was encoded in ritual, in the specific chants or ceremonial practices that surrounded the work, not as superstition, but as a mnemonic device, a way to ensure every step of a complex. Written recipe was performed in the exact correct order. A single missed beat, a slightly wrong temperature, and the batch would be ruined, a catastrophic loss of precious resources. This made the master artisan a living library, and the apprentice system the only backup drive. The recipe for mirror black patina, or the sintering mix for platinum, was not in a book. It was in the careful watching of hands, the listening to a master's warnings about the quality of the morning air for a pour. This system was both incredibly robust and terribly fragile. It could preserve knowledge across centuries within a stable guild or family line, but it was exquisitely vulnerable to the tremors of history. A war that scattered a community of smiths, a social collapse that erased the patronage for such exquisite bronzes, an economic shift that made the long, costly production of Wootz ingots no longer profitable. Any of these could sever the chain in a single generation. The knowledge didn't vanish in a cataclysm, it often faded with a whisper, as the last master died without an heir who had learned the final, most subtle secret. The metallurgy itself was never lost, the objects remain. What disappeared was the living context, the curated sequence of actions, the sensory data that turned raw materials into a marvel. We are left with the magnificent result, but the verb, the specific doing, has fallen silent. This is why our modern recreations, armed with spectral analysis and precise furnaces, so often fall short. We have the fingerprint, but we are missing the touch of the hand that made it. The forge was their laboratory, and the senses were their only instruments. Without a single written formula or a concept of molecular chemistry, the ancient smith operated as an intuitive materials scientist of the highest order. His understanding was not abstract, but embodied, a continuous dialogue conducted through sight, sound, and even smell. He judged the temperature of his fire not by a number, but by a symphony of color, from the deep, dull red of a low heat to the searing, almost white incandescence needed for welding. Each shade spoke a clear language about the metal within, a language he had learned by watching 1,000 heats. The sound of the metal under the hammer was another critical diagnostic. A clear, ringing ping might indicate the steel was ready for quenching, while a dull thud could signal it was too cold, its internal structure locked and unyielding. The very smell of the workshop, the tang of oxidizing iron, the scent of burning charcoal, and the particular odor of the flux used to keep the metal clean, all formed a sensory map that guided his decisions. He observed the behavior of the slag, the molten glass-like impurities that rose to the surface. Its viscosity and color told him about the purity of the melt and the progress of the refining process. A skilled smith could look at the flow of slag and know if his iron needed more time in the fire or a different balance of air from the bellows. This was process control through environmental feedback, a real-time adjustment of variables based on subtle, analog cues. He didn't understand that heating steel to a critical temperature altered its crystalline structure from body-centered to face-centered cubic, a change we call the austenite transformation. But he knew absolutely that if the metal glowed that specific, bright cherry red and was then plunged into water, it would emerge file-hard and ready to be tempered back to toughness. His knowledge was a perfect, functional map of cause and effect, even if the underlying territory of atoms and phases remained uncharted. This sensory expertise represents the single greatest portion of the lost knowledge, because it was fundamentally unwritten and it was a form of tacit knowledge, residing in the muscles, the nerves, and the refined perceptions of the practitioner. You could document the steps, list the ingredients, but you could not transmit the precise feeling of the hammer's rebound or the exact visual cue that separated a good heat from a perfect one. This wisdom was earned through a long, silent apprenticeship of watching, doing, and making mistakes, a transfer of understanding that required a shared context of fire, noise, and shared intention. When that chain of lived experience broke, the deepest layer of the craft evaporated instantly. We are left with the artifacts, and with our own sophisticated instruments that can tell us what the metal is, but not how it felt to the hand that made it. The true secret was not in the ore, but in the artisan's ability to listen to the conversation between earth and flame, a conversation conducted in a language we have largely forgotten how to hear. The true challenge of rediscovery may lie in the very purity of our modern laboratories. We often attempt to recreate these ancient marvels using standardized, high-grade materials, metals and clays of known, consistent composition. But this approach misses a fundamental truth of the ancient world. The craftsman did not work with pure elements, he worked with a specific piece of the earth. His techniques were not developed in a vacuum. They evolved in a deep, intimate partnership with the unique, variable ores and clays found in his local landscape. This variance in raw material is not a footnote, it is the cornerstone of the mystery. The legendary properties of Damascus steel, for instance, were inseparable from the specific iron ore mined in parts of ancient India. That ore contained trace amounts of vanadium, molybdenum, and other rare elements, impurities we would meticulously filter out today. To the ancient smith, these were not impurities at all, they were the secret ingredients. The natural catalysts that guided the formation of the steel's internal crystalline structure, and those astonishing carbon nanotube during the slow thermal cycling process. A modern smith using pure iron and carbon, following the same steps, will produce a patterned steel, but it will lack the legendary resilience. The recipe was tuned to a specific dirty ore. The same principle echoes in the Roman concrete. The pozzolana ashram has a specific chemical signature, a blend of volcanic glass and minerals from the eruptions of Mount Vesuvius. Ash from a different volcano, with a slightly different mineral content, would not trigger the same long-term chemical reaction with lime and seawater. The Roman engineers knew this. The architect Vitruvius explicitly recommends the ash from specific regions. Their entire formula, from the mix ratios to the curing process, was calibrated for that one perfect type of dirt. This local dependency transforms our understanding of the loss. It means these techniques were not universal metallurgical principles that could be written down and applied anywhere. They were hyper-local solutions, brilliant adaptations to a specific geology. The master's knowledge included an intuitive understanding of how the ore from this particular hillside, or the clay from that specific riverbank, would behave under his tools. His process was a dialogue with the imperfections of his world. When the source material changed or was forgotten, the technique built around it became a locked door without a key. We can analyze a Wootz ingot and know it contains vanadium, but we cannot find the exact, depleted mine, nor replicate the billions of years of geological chance that created that precise ore body. We are trying to replay a symphony with only the sheet music for the violin part, missing the unique timbre of the original instruments. The lost craft, therefore, was not just a set of actions. It was an ecosystem of knowledge, linking a specific place on the map to a specific fire in a forge, a connection severed by time and forgotten geography. This gap between ancient earth and modern lab is where a new kind of detective steps in. The field is a science born from the marriage of archaeology and materials engineering. Its mission is to interrogate the silent artifacts, not for their artistic meaning, but for their material testimony. The tools of this investigation are extensions of our own senses, allowing us to see what the ancient smith could only feel. X-ray fluorescence scanners pass over a bronze mirror, not to see its design, but to instantly reveal the precise percentages of copper, tin, and lead in its alloy, a chemical fingerprint of its origin. Spectrometry can detect the faintest traces of elements like vanadium in a sliver of Damascus steel, clues to the long-lost ore source. But the most profound insights come from microscopy. by taking a hair-thin cross-section of an ancient metal object, polishing it to a mirror finish, and etching it with mild acid, researchers can reveal its microstructure under powerful microscopes. What appears to the naked eye as smooth, uniform metal is transformed into a breathtaking landscape of crystals, grains, and phases. In a Roman bronze, they might see the size and shape of the grains, telling them how fast it cooled. In a sliver of platinum gold, they can witness the individual grains fused together, confirming the sintering process. This microstructural map is the artifact's hidden diary, recording every thermal shock, every hammer blow, every quenching bath it experienced centuries ago. The learns to read this diary, translating crystalline patterns back into the craftsman's actions. But analysis is only half the story. The true test of a hypothesis comes through experimental archaeology, the attempt to physically recreate the past. Researchers build replica clay furnaces based on archaeological finds, source ores from similar geological settings, and try to follow the fragmented recipes. They will spend days slowly cycling the heat on a piece of steel, watching for the pattern to form, or mix volcanic ash and lime with seawater, casting blocks of concrete to monitor for mineral growth over years. These experiments are often humbling failures, but each failed batch is a data point, eliminating a wrong path and whispering clues about the right one. This painstaking, collaborative detective work, blending cutting-edge science with the dirt under our nails, is how we slowly, word by word, begin to reconstruct the lost language of ancient materials. Yet this powerful scientific lens has its own blind spots. We can now map the atomic structure of a Damascus blade with breathtaking clarity, identifying the carbon nanotubes and the precise arrangement of its crystalline phases. We can list the chemical components of Roman concrete down to the last trace element, but this is a snapshot of a finished product, a still image of the final act. What science often struggles to capture is the performance itself, the dynamic, living sequence of actions that led to that frozen moment in the microstructure. Think of it like this: we can analyze a masterfully baked loaf of bread and tell you its exact moisture content, the size of its air pockets, and the compounds that give it its flavor. But that analysis cannot tell you the baker's exact hand motion when kneading the dough, the precise moment he decided it had proofed enough, or the subtle adjustment he made to the oven's dampers based on the humidity in the air that morning. These are the transient, human decisions that bridge the gap between a list of ingredients and a work of art. The ancient smith's process was a continuous dance, a real-time negotiation with a material that was constantly changing. The sequence was everything, and it was locked in motion. Was the Wootz ingot heated to a bright yellow heat and then forged once, or was it brought to a lower orange heat and worked lightly a dozen times? Did the Roman builder pour the concrete mix all at once, or in layers with a specific pause between them? Did the Chinese founder quench the bronze mold in water immediately, or let it cool slowly in the pit? Our microscopes show us the result of those choices, but they cannot replay the choreography. The tools themselves are another missing variable. The exact shape and weight of the smith's hammer, the specific force of his strike, the unique airflow pattern from his particular set of goat skin bellows, these are all lost to time. We can guess, but we cannot know the exact tactile feedback the material gave under those specific, vanished conditions. This is why experimental archaeology, for all its value, can feel like trying to hit a moving target in the dark. A team may follow the chemical recipe perfectly and still produce a brittle sword or a crumbly concrete block, because the intangible rhythm, the master's secret tempo, was the true catalyst. Science excels at answering the question of what. It reveals the magnificent end state. But the how, the fluid, sensory, and often unspoken performance that transformed Earth into wonder, remains just beyond the reach of our finest instruments, echoing in the silence left by the last master's fire. Perhaps the most startling idea to emerge from our modern analysis is that these artisans were, in a sense, the world's first. They were manipulating matter at a scale so minute it defies the imagination, building strength from the realm of molecules and atoms, all without ever knowing it. This is the theory of accidental nanotechnology, the proposal that the supreme durability of these ancient materials stems from microscopic or even nanoscopic features that our advanced tools can now see, but which were created entirely through empirical craft. The craftsman's goal was a sharp blade or a strong harbor wall, but his carefully honed process had an unintended, brilliant consequence. It engineered the material's very architecture at the smallest possible level. The most famous evidence comes from those legendary Damascus blades. When researchers examined slivers under the most powerful microscopes, they found more than just the expected bands of hard and soft steel. Embedded within the metal's matrix were carbon nanotubes, incredibly strong, hollow cylinders of carbon atoms, and nanowires of cementite. These are structures modern science associates with cutting-edge materials engineering, yet here they were, forged over 1,000 years ago. They acted as a natural reinforcement, like microscopic rebar within the steel, giving it that legendary combination of flexibility and fearsome edge retention. The smith was not trying to make nanotubes, he was trying to make a sword that would not break. His repeated cycles of heating, forging, and slow cooling created the perfect conditions for these nanostructures to self-assemble from the carbon in the steel, guided by those trace elements from the Indian ore. His lost technique was, in effect, a repeatable recipe for inducing this nanoscale growth, a recipe written in the rhythm of the fire rather than in a chemical formula. The same principle appears in the Roman sea walls, though with a different actor. The long-term chemical conversation between seawater, lime, and volcanic ash did more than just make a hard rock. It prompted the slow, patient growth of rare, plate-like crystals of aluminous. These crystals are not nano in size, but their formation is a precisely controlled chemical process that fills the concrete's pores with an interlocking, reinforcing scaffold. The Roman engineers accidentally created the ideal environment for this mineral to nucleate and grow over decades, effectively giving their concrete a living, strengthening skeleton. In both cases, the ancient method succeeded because it was not a single event, but a guided process. It was not about reaching one temperature and stopping, but about leading the material through a sequence of transformations. A journey during which the optimal nano and microstructures had the time and the right conditions to emerge. The loss, then, is profound. It means these cultures possessed not just a recipe for mixing, but a deep, procedural wisdom for coaxing hidden order from chaos. They knew how to set a chain of events in motion that would culminate in a material with built-in, invisible armor. We can now see that armor with our electron microscopes, but we are still learning how to whisper the commands that convince the metal or the mortar to build it for itself. This long view of craftsmanship suggests a second, equally compelling theory. Perhaps the most vital ingredient in these ancient recipes was not a mineral or a tool, but something far more elusive, time itself. This is the long-term optimization hypothesis. It proposes that the supreme quality of these alloys was not the product of a single genius inventor, but the cumulative result of a cultural process, a slow, generational conversation between artisans and their materials. The loss we mourn, then, is not merely a static formula scribbled on a scroll, but the entire living, breathing, and incredibly slow tradition of incremental refinement. Imagine a master smith in a Damascus workshop 1200 years ago. He inherits a technique from his teacher, a method for working the Wootz steel that produces good blades. But in his lifetime, he experiments, perhaps trying a slightly different quenching medium or adding one more thermal cycle. Most of his experiments fail, resulting in cracked or soft metal. But one small change, observed over years, yields a blade that is just a little more resilient. He teaches this adjusted method to his most promising apprentice, who in his own long career makes another tiny, successful tweak. This cycle repeats, not for decades, but for centuries. Each generation stands on the shoulders of the last, not with a dramatic leap, but with a patient, almost imperceptible nudge toward perfection. The knowledge was not a fixed point, it was a moving target, honed by the relentless, slow feedback of performance. A sword that lasted a season longer on the battlefield, a concrete harbor that needed one less repair in a century. These were the data points that guided this generational experiment. This process operated on a timescale that is fundamentally alien to our modern research and development. A contemporary materials lab works in grant cycles of 3 to 5 years, seeking breakthroughs that can be patented and brought to market rapidly. Their goal is often a definitive answer, a reproducible process locked down and standardized. The ancient system had no such deadline. It was a continuous, open-ended dialogue, where the definition of better was allowed to evolve over lifetimes. This explains why our modern recreations, even with perfect chemical analysis, can feel like they are missing the soul of the material. We are trying to replicate the endpoint of a 500-year journey after having only glimpsed the final destination. We lack all the subtle, discarded paths, the thousands of minor failures and adjustments that collectively sculpted the ultimate technique. The true method was embedded in the tradition itself, in the unbroken chain of hands that passed the hammer, each pair of hands leaving a barely noticeable, yet critical, imprint on the craft. When that chain was broken, the momentum of centuries of optimization was lost instantly. We are left with the magnificent final product, but the slow, collective intelligence that built it, an intelligence distributed across generations, is a resource we simply cannot replicate. It suggests that some forms of knowledge are not just stored in people or texts, but in the sustained rhythm of a culture's practice, a rhythm that, once stilled, echoes only as a mystery in the metal left behind. The final theory takes us into the heart of the workshop, where the line between science and ceremony blurred completely. This is the concept of ritual and recipe entanglement, the idea that the physical steps of metallurgy were woven together with sacred actions, creating a single, unbreakable protocol for success. To the modern mind, a chant or an offering to a forge god seems like superstition, a decorative layer over the real work of fire and metal. But for the ancient artisan, this distinction likely did not exist. The ritual was not an add-on, it was the essential container that held the fragile technical knowledge in place. Think of it as the ultimate quality control system, encoded not in a manual, but in the rhythms of belief. A master founder preparing to cast a monumental bronze bell for a temple would not simply mix his alloys and light the furnace. His work was preceded by days of purification, specific prayers recited at precise moments, and offerings made to the spirits of the earth and fire. The timing of the pour might be determined by an astrologer who declared the alignment of stars auspicious for such a transformative act. To us, the star alignment had no physical effect on the molten bronze. But to the craftsman, skipping that step was unthinkable, not just because it might anger the gods, but because it broke the sacred sequence that guaranteed a flawless cast. The ritual enforced a mandatory pause, a period of focused mental preparation, and a strict, unalterable order of operations. It prevented haste, the great enemy of delicate craftsmanship. In a world without written checklists or digital timers, the rhythm of chance and the observance of ceremonial days became the mnemonic architecture for the entire process. The knowledge of how to create mirror black patina on a bronze mirror, for instance, was not just a chemical formula. It was a guarded secret passed down within a lineage of artisans who were also priests of a sort. The process of applying the sulfurous paste or mercury mixture was accompanied by specific incantations. The ritual did not cause the chemical reaction, but it ensured that every step was performed with exacting reverence and in the correct order, that the paste was mixed to the right consistency, applied evenly, and heated for the proper duration. If the ritual was forgotten or performed incorrectly, the technical steps would inevitably become sloppy or out of sequence, leading to failure. The belief system provided the rigid framework that protected the empirical recipe from corruption or shortcut. When the cultural context that gave these rituals their meaning collapsed, often through conquest, religious change, or social upheaval, the entire integrated system fell apart. The technical steps, now stripped of their ceremonial casing, became vulnerable. They were seen as mere folklore, old wives' tales from a less enlightened age, and were easily discarded or forgotten. The baby was thrown out with the ritual bathwater. We are left trying to reconstruct a chemical process while missing the ceremonial cadence that once held it perfectly in time. This entanglement suggests that the deepest craft secrets were not just about controlling fire and metal, but about controlling the human element, about using the power of shared belief to ensure that every action, from the selection of the ore to the final polish, was performed with a discipline that approached the sacred. The loss, therefore, is not of a technique, but of a worldview where making something perfect was itself a form of prayer. The very systems that promised to build a new world became the final tomb for the old ways. The Industrial Revolution did not simply create new methods, it systematically dismantled the ancient, artisanal framework that had preserved craft secrets for. This was not a peaceful transition. It was a seismic cultural shift where the economics of scale clashed with the economics of mastery, and mastery lost. Before the age of steam and iron, value was intrinsically linked to quality and durability. A sword was a lifetime investment. A cathedral's bronze doors were a project spanning generations. The guild system, for all its secrecy and exclusivity, functioned as a living archive. Knowledge was passed in the dim light of the forge, from master to apprentice, through a long, silent apprenticeship of watching and doing. The incentive to protect these secrets was immense, for they defined a family's reputation and a city's wealth. But the industrial age introduced a new god, efficiency. Suddenly, the goal was not to make one perfect thing for a noble patron, but 10,000 good enough things for a mass market. Standardization was the new mantra. A factory required consistent, predictable inputs and repeatable processes. The quirky, trace element-rich ores that gave Damascus steel its magic were a supply chain nightmare. The patient, day thermal cycling of a Wootz ingot was an intolerable delay on a production line. The secret, variable recipes of the guilds were incompatible with the need for uniform manuals and interchangeable parts. Demand for the bespoke, the ultra-resilient, the artistically unique, evaporated among the new industrial and military elites, who now prized volume and rapid replacement over legendary durability. Why commission a single, costly sword that could last 100 years when you could equip an entire regiment with reliable, factory made muskets in a month. The economic foundation of the artisanal world crumbled. Guilds dissolved as their members were lured into factories or saw their markets disappear. The last masters, often elderly and without apprentices willing to learn a dying art, found themselves as lonely archivists of a discarded language. Their knowledge, which had once been the key to prestige and prosperity, became a curious relic, a set of impractical old tricks in a world obsessed with new speed. When these final keepers passed away, they took with them not just steps, but the sensory wisdom, the rhythmic intuition, the very feel of the craft. The secrets did not fade from a single catastrophe. They were made obsolete, rendered economically extinct by the relentless logic of progress. The factory floor, with its roaring machines and standardized outputs, became the quiet killer of 1,000 subtle arts, not through malice, but through sheer, indifferent momentum. The silence of lost techniques is not always permanent. Sometimes, a whisper from the past finds a listener in the present, sparking a recovery that can reshape our future. This is happening now, in laboratories and construction sites, with the ancient secret of Roman concrete. After centuries of regarding them as mere historical curiosities, scientists have finally begun to translate their material language into a modern dialect, and the implications are revolutionary. The key breakthrough came from looking at the Roman formula not as a mistake, but as a deliberate and sophisticated choice. Researchers led by materials scientist Jackson made a pivotal observation. When they examined samples of 2,000-year-old harbor concrete under high-powered microscopes, they found something previous theories had overlooked: tiny, white, millimeter-sized lumps scattered throughout the material. These were not flaws. They were chunks of quicklime, the same highly reactive powder made from roasted limestone. Their presence was a clue that shattered old assumptions. For decades, the prevailing theory was that the Romans used slaked lime, a more stable and less caustic paste, in their mixes. The discovery of these raw quicklime clasts suggested the opposite: they were using hot mixing. This meant adding the powdered quicklime directly to the volcanic ash and aggregate, likely with seawater. When water hit the quicklime, it triggered a violent exothermic reaction, releasing intense heat and creating a more porous, less uniform initial matrix. To a modern engineer, this looked like poor practice, but the Romans were engineering for time, not just initial strength. These lime clasts, the researchers realized, were the material's secret self-healing agents. As tiny cracks inevitably form over centuries from the stress of waves, water seeps into the concrete. When that water reaches one of these embedded lime clasts, it reactivates it. The quicklime can then dissolve and recrystallize as calcium carbonate, effectively gluing the crack shut from the inside. The concrete possesses a built-in repair kit, distributed throughout its volume, ready to activate whenever the environment challenges it. This understanding is no longer just academic. It is driving the development of a new generation of green concrete. Modern Portland cement production is a major source of global carbon dioxide emissions, accounting for roughly 8% of the world's total. The Roman recipe offers a blueprint for a more sustainable alternative. Inspired by the hot mix process, companies and research teams are now creating modern concretes that incorporate engineered lime clasts or other reactive compounds. These new formulations are designed to be more durable, requiring less repair and replacement over a structure's lifetime, which drastically reduces its long-term environmental footprint. Some are even designed to absorb carbon dioxide from the air as they cure, turning the concrete from a carbon source into a carbon sink. The decoding of this one-lost technique is proving that ancient wisdom can provide direct, powerful solutions to contemporary crises. It turns historical mystery into a practical toolkit for building a more resilient world. The Roman engineers could never have envisioned climate change, but their deep understanding of material longevity, recovered piece by piece, is now helping us address it. This partial success story is a beacon, suggesting that other lost harmonies between human craft and the natural world might still be recovered. Waiting only for us to learn how to listen to the quiet lessons held in ancient stone. We can analyze the final sword, but we cannot interview the steel as it cooled. This is the core reason why a perfect, complete recovery of these techniques remains just beyond our grasp. The challenge is not a lack of scientific tools, but the very nature of the knowledge that was lost. It was not a static set of instructions. It was a living performance, a symphony conducted by masters who could read a language of heat and sound that has no written alphabet. The first irreplaceable ingredient is that master intuition. All our spectral analysis and electron microscopy can tell us what the material is, but they cannot tell us what it felt like to the artisan's hand. The precise moment to pull the glowing Wootz from the forge was not marked by a timer, but by a specific, shimmering hue of orange-yellow that the smith had learned to recognize after a lifetime by the fire. The correct force of a hammer blow was not measured in newtons, but in the resonant ring the metal made upon impact, a note that signaled its readiness. This sensory data, this tacit knowledge stored in muscles and nerves, evaporated the moment the last master's hands grew still. We are trying to document a performance art that was never meant to be documented, only experienced and passed on through shared practice. Then there is the problem of local materials. Our modern recreation attempts often use purified, standardized elements, but the ancient techniques were born from a deep marriage with a specific place. The Damascus steel recipe was tuned to the unique, trace element-rich ore from a particular region of India. The Roman concrete formula demanded the exact volcanic ash from. These were not generic solutions, they were brilliant, hyper-local adaptations. We can identify the vanadium in the finished blade, but we cannot find the exact, long-exhausted mine, nor can we replicate the geological chance that created that precise ore body over eons. We are missing the original partners in the dialogue. Perhaps the most profound obstacle is the loss of the entire cultural technical ecosystem. These crafts were not isolated hobbies. They were vital threads woven into the fabric of their societies, supported by guilds, patronage, and a shared belief system that valued long-term durability over short-term gain. The master smith or founder was not just a technician. He was a keeper of tradition, embedded in a slow, generational conversation of incremental improvement. His work was framed by rituals that, while seemingly superstitious to us, enforced discipline, timing, and an unbreakable sequence of actions. When that societal framework collapsed, the technical knowledge within it became orphaned and vulnerable, easily discarded as mere folklore. We are now trying to reconstruct a single tree by studying a fossilized leaf, missing the forest, the soil, and the climate that allowed it to grow. So while we may successfully mimic the appearance of a Damascus pattern or cast a thin-walled bronze vessel, the quest for a perfect, complete replication is likely a forever pursuit. We are attempting to reverse engineer not just an object, but a moment in a continuous living tradition, a moment that passed silently centuries ago. The true legacy of these lost techniques, then, may not be a blueprint we can finally recover, but a permanent lesson in the different ways humanity can know the world. A reminder that some forms of understanding are written not in books, but in the silent language of skilled hands and patient observation. Perhaps the greatest legacy of these vanished workshops is not the artifacts they left behind, but the questions they force us to ask today. The pursuit of their secrets, a centuries-long investigation born from our own technological pride, has ironically become one of the most powerful engines for modern innovation. In trying to reverse engineer the past, we have been compelled to invent entirely new futures for our own materials. The frustrating, humbling quest to understand Damascus steel did not just end with a historical footnote. It fundamentally reshaped how we think about strengthening metal. When researchers discovered that trace elements like vanadium were the hidden architects of the steel's legendary properties, it launched the entire field of microalloying. This is the science of adding tiny, precise amounts of other elements to a base metal, not as impurities to be removed, but as deliberate designers of its internal crystalline structure. Modern high-strength steels used in everything from skyscrapers to car frames owe a direct debt to that ancient Indian ore. The Damascus puzzle also pushed us to better understand and engineer composite materials, substances that combine two or more distinct components to create a new material with superior properties. The ancient blade was a natural composite of hard carbides in a soft matrix, a harmony we now strive to replicate synthetically in materials like carbon fiber reinforced polymers. Their empirical mastery of layered structures guides our own quest for lighter, stronger alloys for aerospace and medicine. Each failed modern replica was not a dead end, but a signpost pointing toward a deeper principle of material science we had overlooked. Similarly, the stubborn endurance of Roman harbor walls is now catalyzing a green revolution in construction. For decades, we viewed their concrete as a curious relic, a product of lucky guesswork. But decoding its self-healing chemistry has revealed a blueprint for sustainability. Modern researchers, inspired by the Roman use of reactive lime clasts, are developing new concretes that can repair their own cracks, dramatically extending the of bridges, roads, and buildings. This directly addresses one of the modern world's greatest environmental burdens, the colossal carbon footprint of constant repair and reconstruction. More profoundly, the Roman philosophy of using abundant, natural materials like volcanic ash is driving the search for alternatives to Portland cement, whose production is a major source of global carbon emissions. The ancient method shows us that durability does not have to come at the cost of the planet, that we can build in concert with natural chemistry rather than in opposition to it. These historical losses, therefore, are not merely voids in our knowledge, they are active generative spaces. They represent roads not taken, solutions perfected by forgotten hands that now challenge the assumptions of our own age. The silent smiths and masons did not give us their recipes, but in their absence, they gave us something perhaps more valuable, a permanent provocation. They force us to question whether our path of pure standardization and disposable design is the only way, or even the best way. Their legacy lives on not in a perfectly recreated sword hanging in a museum, but in the stronger, greener, more resilient materials being born in laboratories today. All because we dared to ask how they did what we still cannot. The conversation with the past, it turns out, is not about recovering what was lost, but about discovering what we have yet to find. The enduring objects we have explored are more than relics. They are the final, eloquent sentences of a story whose first chapters are lost. Our investigation has traveled from Damascus forges to Roman harbors, from Chinese foundries to Andean workshops, chasing the ghost of a question: how did they do it? We have found chemical formulas and crystalline maps, but the true answer, the living answer, continues to retreat. What has truly vanished is not a checklist, not a recipe scribbled on a faded scroll. The profound loss is the deep, tacit knowledge that once fused material, maker, and method into a single, seamless act of creation. It was the wisdom in the hands that felt the hammer's rebound, the knowledge in the eyes that could read the fire's true temperature in 1,000 shades of orange and yellow, the intuition in the ears that heard the song of cooling metal. This was knowledge written in muscle memory and sensory experience, a language spoken only in the shared heat of the workshop between master and apprentice. It was the unspoken rhythm that turned a list of ingredients into a living process. This mystery imposes a necessary humility on our modern technological confidence. We can split atoms and peer into the quantum realm, yet we stand in respectful silence before a 2,000-year-old sword or a harbor wall that has conversed with the sea since the days of the Caesars. Their endurance whispers that our mastery of the material world, for all its power, is still young, and that other forms of understanding, rooted in patience and deep observation, have paved roads we have yet to fully rediscover. So the next time you see an ancient artifact in a museum, do not see it merely as a thing of beauty or a historical curiosity. Look past the glass and the polished display. See it instead as a testament to a fragile human dimension, to the quiet genius of countless unnamed hands, to the generational conversations held over fire and anvil. These objects outlasted empires and civilizations, not in spite of their human origins, but because of them. They are the ultimate signature of a craft that understood its materials as partners in a dialogue whose most intimate secrets faded with the last breath of the last master, leaving only their magnificent, silent work to speak across the ages.